Hello, welcome everyone to the Greater Houston Partnership's Business Beyond Borders program today. We have several people trying to get in right now, so we'll give them just a few seconds to join us, and then we'll start the program. Hope everyone's doing well. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Carrie Broderson. I'm the Vice President of Events and Business Resource Groups here at the Greater Houston Partnership. Thanks for joining us for our first Business Beyond Borders program of 2021. Welcome back to our subscribers and welcome to our guests that are joining us today. We hope we'll see you for future programming. Business Beyond Borders is one of 9 targeted information and discussion groups at the Greater Houston Partnership. And this particular resource group is designed to bring thought-provoking global topics and international market research and business opportunities to our members. So this is this particular business resource group's mission statement. We'll provide information on how to subscribe to Business Beyond Borders in the chat feature. Today we're holding part 1 of a 2-part special session on COVID-19's impact on supply chains and when reshoring should be part of your business plan, sourcing or manufacturing mix. The second part, which we'll be holding next week, Tuesday, March 2nd at noon, originally was scheduled for today. We did have to move some things around due to the last week's power outages. We hope you all join us for next week, and we also are looking forward to you getting a lot of great information about business segmentation with regards to the reshoring process. You will have the link to register for next week's event sent to you, but we'll also provide information about where to find it on our website. Please you check the chat throughout the program to receive links to registration information and resources for today's event. I do want to thank our supporting organizations for today, Beehive Fund and the TMAC Gulf Coast, TMAC Gulf Coast, for their support. These agencies support the growth of our manufacturing sector in the Houston region, and we do actually have speakers from those organizations here with us today. I do want to make a special announcement. For those of our members, Houstonians and Texans who are on the webinar today, we recognize it's been a very difficult week. We were challenged a little bit of whether we should host today's event, but with those that are still in recovery. But we wanted to continue with our business programming. We know that many of our colleagues and friends and businesses have faced varying degrees of impact from this winter storm. And that's left a lot of people without power and water and other services. So on behalf of the Greater Houston Partnership, we're hoping you and your loved ones are now safe and your businesses are coming back online. In the event you are still experiencing the impact of last week's freeze, listed on the screen are several services and resource links. Many of you have all of this information already, but we just want to make sure that you have access to it here today. And throughout the programming this week, we'll be mentioning it as well. This information will be in the chat feature, so you do not necessarily need to take a picture of the screen. But do note that there is FEMA information here, as well as today, the Small Business Administration is holding its virtual business recovery center and disaster loan outreach, again, virtually. And that's the link there for that. And then for resources for individuals and businesses, including where to donate, if you have the ability to donate, we have a link for that information as well. Any questions you have at all, any needs that you have, please feel free to contact the Greater Houston Partnership at member.engagement@houston.org. And we do hope that everyone is safe and sound. So now on to our program. We have 3 wonderful speakers today, both from our government agencies, nonprofit, and public and private, supporting our manufacturing industry. I'll run through their brief introductions. Know that their full bios are on our website, and we'll also link to them in the chat feature. And we'll be taking questions from all of them at the end of today's program. So if you do have questions for our speakers, please do submit those on the Q&A tab. We want to use questions for our speakers in that tab. If you have any other questions, comments, technical issues, please do put those in the chat feature instead of the Q&A. But we'll make sure that we remind you about throughout the program. First, we have Pam Plagans. Pam Plagans currently serves as the director of the Advanced Manufacturing Team for the U.S. Commercial Service. This is also part of the International Trade Administration of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And Pam is here locally, but she serves in a global capacity. Her team focuses on promoting U.S. exports of industrial technology and advanced materials. In addition to promoting exports and direct investment into the U.S., Pam's role extends to providing executive coaching across her organization. She's been with the Commercial Service Houston office since 2000. Dr. Sanju Patro is the director of TMAC Gulf Coast and co-founder of Beehive Fund. That is a nonprofit organization that provides practical solutions in manufacturing and service industries, along with offering graduate level research support focusing on transitioning small and medium-sized businesses to advance tech concepts using AI, Internet of Things, and cognitive computing. She has over 25 years of experience consulting businesses in the manufacturing sector. Pleased to have Dr. Patro with us today. Harry Moser is the founder and president of Reshoring Initiative. Prior to that, he was president of a high-end manufacturing toolmaker, GF Machining Solutions, for 22 years. He's a member of the U.S. Department of Commerce's Investment Advisory Council, and also has been a contributor to many of Washington and our former administration's policies around manufacturing and reshoring. So we're very, very pleased to have all three of these guests here with us today. I do want to mention a couple of folks over on the attendee or audience side that's joining us. Fred Welch is on the team here at the Greater Houston Partnership and works closely with our manufacturing sector. And Valerie Matthew is manager of regional economic development. You'll also see their contact information in the chat if you'd like to get in touch with them throughout the program. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll turn things over to Pam. And Pam, just let me know when you'd like to move forward.
Well, I think we can get it going. Hey, Carrie, thanks so much for the intro. I am really happy to be here today. Apparently my dog is happy as well. He just started barking. I met Harry at IMTS in 2018, the International Manufacturing Technology Show, and was really excited when I understood that he was going to be addressing the Houston audience. So so pleased that I was able to join this group. I was very impressed by the mission of his group and his inspiration to take on what seemed to be at the time an uphill battle. And fast forward to 2021, and reshoring and resilience are keys to the survival of many companies, as well as the strength and the security of the U.S. economy. The U.S. Commercial Service, my organization, has over 100 offices across the United States and is based in the U.S. embassies and consulates in 75 plus key trading nations worldwide. If you export, we hope you already know us. We are the lead trade promotion agency of the U.S. government and the only U.S.-based trade promotion agency with offices across the globe. My team of specialists worldwide provides consulting, market intelligence, and B2B engagement for America's most innovative businesses. We are one of 20 industry and regional teams across the commercial service that provide customized solutions unique to the sector or the region. Our portfolio includes the things that make the things, such as additive manufacturing, industrial materials, automation, and Industry 4.0. In fiscal year 2020, that just passed us, through grit and determination and great ingenuity, U.S. firms exported $2.2 trillion of U.S.-made products and services to customers around the world. However, competitors are increasing their global market share every day. Reshoring your manufacturing will help increase the U.S. content that goes into export sales and lead to a stronger impact across our economy. So let our global network work for you. Whether you're looking to make your first export sale or expand to additional markets, we offer the expertise you need to connect with lucrative opportunities and increase your bottom line. Our services are constantly evolving to stay aligned with the needs of U.S. business to compete. Overall, that includes export counseling, market intelligence, B2B engagement with pre-screened buyers and partners, and commercial diplomacy. And each has been adapted to the virtual world that we all live in. Your local U.S. Commercial Service office is the Houston Export Assistance Center, where you can tap into our global opportunities and resources. And if your product's content is less than the 51% the 51% threshold of U.S. content that our services require, the presentation today can help you qualify. Sanju, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Carrie, would you please forward to the next slide? We'll just get started. So I want to start with the Buy American Act. The US government is the world's biggest single buyer. They spend $600 billion on contracting for goods and services. This Buy American Act was signed in 1933, as far back then, by President Hoover, and it basically requires all goods for public use must be manufactured domestically. So there are two major criteria that need to be satisfied. One is the end product must be manufactured in the United States, and at least 50%, and I think Pam just mentioned 51%, that number sometimes changes, but about 50% of the cost of the components must also be of US origin. So if you're selling to the US government, you need to meet these criteria. And the government expects contractors and vendors to verify their compliance. What that means is the burden of proof lies with the business. If you're selling to the US government, you need to be able to prove that you meet the criteria set in the Buy American Act provisions, which also means if parts that are used in your product you're selling to the government are coming from other third-party vendors, then you need to be able to prove those vendors are also complying to these requirements. And in addition to the federal government, many state and local governments also have included similar requirements and provisions in their procurement processes. So overall, this seems like a great opportunity for American manufacturers to do business with this biggest single buyer, the US government. Next slide, please. So let's talk about this. It looks overall like a great idea, a great opportunity. However, these laws, they exist that require the government to contract with US companies, but there have been some criticism on these requirements. On one hand, the criticism is that these government purchasing provisions, policies are too restrictive. On the other hand, there's also criticism that there are too many waiver opportunities and loopholes in these regulations. In certain instances, the requirements may be waived. The requirements on the percentage of the components made in the US and so on, they may be waived if the domestic product is too expensive compared to an identical foreign sourced product, or if the product is not available domestically in sufficient quantity or quality. So there are some opportunities for waiver. And what's happened is this has frustrated some of our small and medium-sized businesses who would like to have these lucrative government contracts, but they generally lose out to larger companies who have taken advantage of those waivers and loopholes. So for instance, a manufacturer can use foreign origin materials and convert them to quote unquote US components by performing a few manufacturing steps on them. So you get this foreign material and have a few processing steps on that material, and now you can claim it's made in USA. The Buy American Act does not strictly require the federal government to buy American. An exemption is made when that domestic end product is unreasonably expensive compared to a foreign product. So there's this lack of clarity. What do you mean by unreasonably expensive? That's not really very clear. So people take advantage of that. the government uses an evaluation factor to kind of inflate the price of a foreign made product to give the advantage to the domestic products. So for instance, if you have a company, let's say company A, that has 100% US made product and is offering that product to the US government for say $110 a unit. And there's company B that's offering an identical product but foreign made for $100. And let's say the government applies a 6% evaluation factor, or basically they inflate company B's product to $106. Well, what happens now? This is still cheaper. The $106 is still cheaper than company A's product, which was 100% American made. So you still lose out because the company B was able to obtain the product so much cheaper from a foreign source. So basically, the Buy American Act does not strictly require the government to buy American, it just simply encourages it. Next slide, please. So on January 25th of this year, President Biden signed what he called the Made in America Executive Order. And this executive order is part of this new administration's promise to boost American manufacturing, US manufacturing. And this order strengthens the Buy American provisions. Basically, they're trying to close the loopholes and trying to make it more easier for American manufacturers to sell their products to the US government. So the new EO executive order directs federal agencies to reevaluate the threshold used to determine that US content, that 50%, 51% content. They are very likely going to make it higher. And this order creates a new website. I don't believe they have it set up yet, but they're going to very soon create a website where American businesses can see what contracts are being awarded to foreign vendors. So now there's more transparency. You can go there and see what products are being purchased from foreign vendors. And if you have a product similar to that you can sell to the government, you can alert the government to the availability of this domestic alternative and sell to them. They're also setting up an oversight office. A new position is being created in the White House's budget office that will oversee the implementation of the Buy American provisions. The executive order also allows a central review of agency waivers of Buy American requirements in order to crack down on unnecessary waivers. It also directs the GSA, General Services Administration, to publish relevant waivers on publicly available websites. So it's going to be much more open and much more oversight. And this is the point I want to get to especially is this new executive order specifically mentions us, the MEP network, and I'll get into that in a minute. So the order directs federal agencies to utilize the MEP, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is us, to connect with new domestic suppliers who can make the products they need while employing American workers. So now we have a big role in this as part of this new executive order. We, the MEP, are able to connect US manufacturers that have relevant production capabilities, capacities with other manufacturers. And therefore, we are able to enable them to fulfill the current market and societal needs. And we can then assist those manufacturers to actually deliver those needed products. Next slide, please, Carrie. So quickly on Manufacturing Extension Partnership, who we are, this is basically a program based at the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. And we are in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. So there are 51 centers, and we are dedicated to delivering comprehensive growth solutions to US manufacturers. MEPs are funded by NIST, by, in some instances, state investments and private donations. And where most federal programs usually have a hard time generating even a one-to-one return on investment to American people, our MEP program has consistently generated much, much higher ROIs. We have gone as high as generating $17 for every federal dollar invested. Last year, which was 2020, one of the, as you know, the hardest year for manufacturers in this country and worldwide, we had a return on investment of nearly 13.6 to 1 for $146 million invested by the federal government. So that's pretty impressive, I think. And our network of manufacturing experts offer very inclusive services to all US small and medium-sized manufacturers, all the way from idea generation to market. So we have product development, operational excellence, process improvement, hiring practices, market penetration, sales revenue, and so on. So anything you can imagine from idea to market, we are able to help you. Next slide, please. So this new role we have with this new supplier scouting on behalf of the federal government, that brings us really in the center of this whole executive order. The MEP National Network Supplier Scouting Assistance can be applied regionally, locally, on a national level, and we can leverage our relations, the existing extensive relationships we have with manufacturers and the knowledge we have of US manufacturing capability. We're able to now use that to connect US manufacturers that have the relevant production capabilities and capacities with other manufacturers and government agencies seeking products from these manufacturers. So whether you're a producer looking for a buyer or you need a supplier, we can support your search. We are in this unique position where we have this direct relationship with manufacturers all over the nation. As I mentioned, there are 51 centers, each state and Puerto Rico, and every state may have multiple sub-centers. And that allows us to have a very deep insight into the products that are being manufactured, the markets, capabilities, processes. And this is the reason why the federal government has chosen us, the MEP, for this special role. Next slide, please. Let me talk quickly about the TMAC Gulf Coast program, which is the program I work under. TMAC Gulf Coast is a Texas MEP hosted by Beehive Fund, as Carrie had mentioned earlier. We are a nonprofit organization. We're located in Houston, Texas. Now, there are multiple MEP centers in Texas, and of course, we have centers in every state. So we provide local expertise for technical, managerial, sales, marketing, operational, cultural improvement, and so on to manufacturing companies, particularly to small and medium-sized enterprises. And our services include training and technical soft skills and implementing rapid improvement changes in organizational improvements. And I'd also like to point out that we do have a lot of partnerships and collaboration. We leverage these partnerships to assist the manufacturers. This webinar itself, as an example, we have GHP, Greater Houston Partnership, as a host and facilitating the event. They assisted with the promotional efforts. And obviously our key speaker, Harry Moses from the Reshoring Initiative, he's participating in this. Then we had Pam Plagans from US Commercial Services. And this is how we collaborate to assist and give the best services the manufacturers deserve. TMAC also partners with local manufacturing associations, economic development organizations, and other nonprofits, SPDCs also. And we also particularly work with local community colleges. We are on their advisory boards. We help them develop the curriculum that's required to fulfill the gap for a skilled workforce entering the job market. And this works very well to support the reshoring efforts of manufacturing. As more and more companies reshore, bring business back to the US, there's going to be a need for more domestic skilled labor. So we try to keep abreast of latest trends and advancements in technologies, such as 3D, deep learning, automation, robotics, cybersecurity, and so on. And the idea is to stay on top of these so we can assist our advise and guide and steer our clients in the right direction to fully anticipate potential new markets and new challenges. And so these are just some of the numbers. I won't read over them, but basically these are 5-year impact numbers that our clients have given us based on our services in the last 5 years from 2016 to 2020. Next slide, please, Carrie. So quickly, I want to talk about COVID-19's impact on US manufacturing. All over the world, we've seen factory shutdowns, demand surges for essential goods. We all know what's going on. There's a lot of stockpiling and panic buying and unavailability of products and so on. And most of the factories that supply these raw materials to manufacturers are located in China. And COVID-19 obviously originated in China, and there were consequential lockdowns, and these manufacturing facilities were shut down, completely disrupting the entire global supply chain. And China provides about 40% of the world's imports of PPEs, personal protective equipment like face shields, protective garments, mouth, nose protection equipment, gloves, goggles, and so on. And so this became a huge challenge for most manufacturers. There was a huge disruption to the supply chain. And in the past, outsourcing decisions, the decision to produce, to get your products from outside the US has been very hastily made based simply on the quoted price. And very little thought has been given to the true cost of outsourcing. So COVID-19 has exacerbated and brought to the surface some of those hidden costs of outsourcing. We are seeing more and more cases of companies facing outsourcing challenges. So for instance, we have a client who very early on, about end of March, early April, made a decision to get into the PPE market. That's not their typical product. And they ordered hundreds of thousands of masks from this particular supplier in China that was FDA approved for medical grade. So as we all know, there was a lot of chaos in the early days in the fast changing scenario with COVID. These shipments got stuck in the FedEx dock in the border for 2 whole weeks. And in that 2-week period, FDA released an updated list of approved suppliers. So by the time the masks came back into the country, this product was no longer medical grade, just because the FDA kicked that supplier out of the list. And now this company was stuck with these hundreds of thousands of masks, and they didn't have a market to sell to because they were prepared to sell to the medical industry. And this is just a simple example of the types of challenges that manufacturers and companies in the US faced, and the challenges that COVID-19 actually exposed. These risks always existed, but COVID-19 just brought it to the surface. So whether they outsource or offshore, manufacturers are going to encounter similar risks and obstacles. And even before COVID-19, manufacturers encountered costs and risks that are related to sourcing materials from outside the US. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that since 1980, there have been at least 7.5 million manufacturing jobs lost due to outsourcing or offshoring. So MEPs are now focusing on educating our manufacturers on the true cost of outsourcing by shedding light on these hidden costs like tariffs, lost opportunity due to longer lead times, currency fluctuations, and lack of agility in design changes, and so on and on. And that's the reason why we partnered with Harry's Reshoring initiative to try and bring this knowledge to our manufacturers. Next slide, please, Carrie. So how do we overcome and turn this around? All this disruption and volatility we are seeing in the supply chains that we are seeing recently begs us to take a deep look into our manufacturing systems and the level of resilience our supply chains have. Companies that have been negatively impacted need to do 2 things immediately. One is take very quick actions to ensure that the business recovers and continues. Basically, they have to do whatever necessary to survive. And number 2, they need to make key strategic changes to enable their long-term stability. And MEP centers like ours are an integral part of this solution to this problem. Our trusted advisors are trained. We are ready to provide rapid recovery solutions. Whether you need assistance applying for recovery loans and grants, seeking new markets because you've pivoted to making PPEs, whether you need a new facility layout to accommodate for the new OSHA and EPA guidelines related to COVID-19, we are there to help you. And through federal funding and other national resources, MEPs will directly assist in product development to strengthen your national supplier base. We will assist manufacturers to establish stronger global competitiveness, and MEPs will provide the necessary resources to elevate our American suppliers to be the first choice of all producers. Next slide, please. So quickly on MEP funding and assistance, in the latest funding round that we had, MEP received $150 million in federal funding for our base services. And we also received an additional $50 million under the CARES Act. And this year we are expecting, I should say, hoping we'll get more, especially with a new role for supplier scouting. And we are very well positioned to offer our comprehensive services we'll utilize this money to assist manufacturers with not only our usual services for increasing your profitability, to grow your market and so on, but also to impact your top line and bottom line growth, and also supplier scouting decisions. So if you're a US manufacturer, you want to engage our services, our doors are wide open. We don't bite, but we need you to explicitly request our services from us, because we are currently very busy helping any manufacturing that we can. Because of COVID, we've been falling back. So we don't do much marketing and promotion of ourselves. We ask that you reach out to us if you need our help. And particularly those in attendance now, if you want to contact us, need our help, go ahead and just type in the chat box, just let me know that you're interested, and I'll get back in touch with you. Just let me know your name, your company name, and your email address. That way I can reach out to you. Or you can send me a private note. You can also, of course, send us a note through the email contact@tmacgc.org. So with that, I'd like to get to our main speaker, Mr. Harry Moser. Harry, he's going to be making the case for reshoring. If it's not already made in your mind, you'll see how important it is that we start bringing up manufacturing back to the US. So Harry, go ahead and take over, please.
Yes, thank you, Sanju. First, can everybody hear me? Yes, Sanju, can you hear me? Good?
Sounds good, Harry.
Okay, great. So first, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it very much. A couple of comments on what Sanju said. Reshoring the production of masks, and those if we had produced in the US, the masks that we imported in 2020 would have created 180,000 manufacturing jobs in the US. I did that calculation about a week ago for another group. 180,000 to be self-sufficient in having masks. So I think that should give you a feeling for the impact that reshoring can have on the country. A little more background on me. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the biggest thing in town was the Singer sewing machine company, which you can see here. And the company in its heyday was the largest factory in the world. Back around 1900, this had 2.6 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was a Goliath of its time. And my grandfather was a foreman there. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers in high school and college. And I went past 20 years ago, and nothing of Singer is made there anymore. As far as I can tell, everything is imported. And I cried then for what we had lost, my family, the city, the state, the country, the thousands and thousands of jobs. And throughout my career, I sold CNC machine tools and foundry equipment, and company after company, industry after industry that I wanted to sell to disappeared, being replaced by imports. And I decided that something had to be done about that. So that's why I founded the Reshoring Initiative. But you can see the effect that these imports have had. In the last 20 years, U.S. manufacturing growth has plateaued. If you measure it by units, by weight, I'm sure it's off substantially. This is measured in value. And manufacturing share of GDP is down about 50%, so down substantially. But it is not because we don't consume goods. So this chart shows our consumption of goods, and it's grown for the last, 12 years at a rate faster than the GDP. So we're consuming more goods all the time. The problem is that we just don't produce enough of them anymore. So the US trade balance, which is our imports minus our exports, excuse the helicopter going past, has grown from the US having a trade surplus until about 1980 to having a trade deficit, again, imports greater than exports, of about $800 billion per year. And that amount, when we eventually overcome that, take us up to balanced trade, is worth a 40% increase in US manufacturing, about 5 million manufacturing jobs. Going along with that, or as a result of that, manufacturing jobs as a percentage of US employment have collapsed from about 27% to about 9% over the same time period. And when you put the two graphs together, you can see pretty clearly there's definitely strong correlation, and most studies have shown that there's also strong cause and effect, that most of the loss of manufacturing jobs in the last 20 years at least has been due to offshoring, not to automation. So why did we lose so many jobs? Primarily price. It turns out when you dig deep into the data, that US manufacturing cost of the selling price at the factory of a US product too often is about 20% higher than Europe and about 40% higher than China, India, places like that. And companies make almost all of their sourcing decision based on price. So we did a survey with Plant Moran, one of the biggest consulting companies, and asked companies, why do you buy from offshore? Why don't you buy locally? And they said price. Overwhelmingly it was price or things driven by price, such as the product is not available in the US here. And why isn't it available? Because the company shut down because they could not compete with the price of the imports. Fortunately, good news, we're starting to see a trend in reshoring. Some people call it onshoring, which is to produce once again in the country product that will be sold here and for a while had been purchased from offshore. Also, FDI, foreign direct investment, same logic, foreign company deciding to produce in the US for the US market instead of shipping here from somewhere else. Some people talk about localization. Another interesting and important trend is nearshoring. You're in Texas, and there certainly is some tendency for work to come out of Asia and come to Mexico or Canada, but more likely Mexico, because the Mexican wage rates are now lower than the Chinese, and Mexico's close and China's far away. So, I want the work to come to the US, but if it can only get to Mexico because it's so labor intensive, cannot be automated, the product coming out of Mexico has about a 40% US content, and product coming out of China has a 5% US content. So getting the product to Mexico is a decent partial solution. The trend overall has been very positive. We started the Reshoring Initiative in 2010, and in that year, the total of the reshoring and FDI trends was about 6,000 jobs. The total peaked in 2017 at about 190,000, driven by the Trump tax cuts and regulatory cuts, fell off in 2018 and 19 because of the business uncertainty from the trade war. And now the reshoring portion, at least, has picked up in 2020. We're getting some more recent figures just coming in the last couple of days would suggest 2020 was even better than what I show there. Why is it coming back? One major reason is wage rates. So this chart shows the unit labor cost to manufacturing a typical product expressed in US dollars, and it's indexed. And the key takeaway is that where the red line, which is the US, dollar cost of making an average thing has stayed about the same for 20 years. In China, that's the blue line at the top, the cost is 5 times what it was 20 years ago. So because of the one-child policy, because of wages going up 10 to 15% per year, work was coming out of China even before the trade war, even before COVID, and now it's coming out even faster. So the sort of the essence of this is, with work coming out of China and potentially available from other countries, how do Texas companies get their share or more than their share of that work? Other reasons work is coming back, e-commerce, the fulfillment center has to be continually resupplied, hard to do from halfway around the world. Automation helps make up for higher wages. Trump tariffs, love them or hate them, has been helped to justify work coming back. People increasingly wanting a made in USA product. The photograph there is Deming, who led the quality movement. His work has certainly helped, as has the lean efforts, and which are very well presented by the MEPs. And so we've all seen the shortages, the supply chain gaps, especially the masks and gowns and gloves, for hour after hour for 6 months. We've seen that on television, but at the same time, there are and people are starting to recognize that there are shortages of rare earth minerals, 5G, discrete electronic components, apparel. We import 97% of it from offshore. Even the Defense Department every year or two puts out a report on the products and materials that it cannot find in the US, and we have to buy from somebody, sometimes allies and sometimes from China, which certainly does not make very good sense. A recent survey by BDO, another good consulting company, asked companies, what are your plans for where you're going to do your production? And 24% of them a couple of months back said they were going to relocate to another country. And of the 22% said they were going to reshore specifically to the US. Now, other surveys have shown not quite as high numbers, but this is certainly, I think, a reasonable approximation of what companies want to do. The challenge is to help them find that they can do that economically. So companies have looked at the problems with the trade war, with the COVID, and they've had supply chains scattered across the world. And then they think about the Fukushima tsunami and the COVID coming out of China, the Thai floods several years back, the Icelandic volcano that stopped air freight from Europe, our own LA dock strike. All these things break the supply chain. And all of a sudden, if you can't get one of the components you need to make your car or whatever it is, you can't finish the assembly of the product. So the companies are starting to decide. They really have two choices. They can have multiple sources, China and India, something like that, or they can have one source that's close by. And so what we recommend for your assembly plant is to nestle your suppliers, your supply chain, as close as you can around it, ideally in the same town or county, ideally in Texas, but if you can't, then at least in the country or at least in the continent. So you have many fewer opportunities for risk, many fewer of those natural disaster or sort of political, economic things like the dock strike can interfere with your deliveries. But companies will still say, no, I'd love to do that. I'd love to be able to sleep at night. I'd love to mitigate that risk, but the US is just too expensive. I can't do that. But we say that's not true for much of what you import if you do the math correctly, if you use TCO, total cost of ownership, instead of looking at wage rate or price or even landed cost, which is the ex-works price or the FOB price plus freight. And because when they look at those measures, they're ignoring 15, 20% of all the costs, and therefore, as I'll show you, fairly often making the wrong choice. So to understand this better, total cost of ownership, which I will go into in detail next week, so stay tuned. Total cost of ownership, you can see in this chart, the Chinese price was 70, the US price was 100. Easy decision by the company, get it from China. But when they did TCO, it's 98 and 108, 98 for China, 108 for the US, only a 10% difference instead of a 30% difference. And within 3 years, at the current rate of change of Chinese wages, the Chinese TCO would be higher. So given this, hopefully the company makes a decision to source domestically. To show you the power of that, this is absolutely the most important slide in the whole presentation. I charted here in blue the Chinese FOB price, so the price leaving the factory as a percentage of the US FOB price. So that's the horizontal axis. At 100, the two are equal. At the peak of the distribution, the Chinese price is about 72% of the US price. So formidable gap to deal with. But when you shift to total cost of ownership for the same products, you shift to the red curve. And if there's a 15% Trump tariff in effect, shift to the yellow curve. You can see how it moved nicely. And the percentage of the cases for which the US wins goes from 8% to 32% to 46%. So just by doing the math correctly, just by getting the companies to do the math correctly, significant portions of what's now offshore can be brought back. Not necessarily brought back in a day, but over a reasonable period of time. So we help companies OEMs specifically to buy and site, meaning where they put their factories, smarter. For suppliers, we help them sell smarter. So if you sell to other companies, components, machines, something, this can help you convince them to buy from you instead of importing. And the methodology is applicable in all countries, but we obviously push it in the United States. So I brought up a couple of cases of reshoring and FDI, foreign direct investment, to let you see what companies are doing. That first one was masks. So I thought that was especially timely, mask equipment. This is some steel in Texas, some more material in Texas, some foreign direct investment of chemical related processes. We track what states are doing the most reshoring, and Texas comes out number 3. So a very solid number 3. So you've done very well and can do even better. My favorite case of reshoring is Mori Corp. So Mori Corp produces printed circuit boards. They're an EMS company, kind of product you see here, and then assemblies made from those. And the key message here, about 5 years ago, the VP sales, named Tony, came to me and he said, Harry, we're about to lose a big order. You got to help me. And so I helped Tony do the TCO calculation from the customer's viewpoint. So the customer could see that even though Mori Corp's price was higher, the total cost to the customer was lower. And I have a quote from Tony saying that was the key to winning a $60 million order. So I'm sure that for many of you, there's $1 million orders and $5 million orders out there that can be obtained if you consistently, aggressively use this when you're competing with imports. So from a cultural or society perspective, which is why I did this, we see a good manufacturing job via reshoring, for example, as the best solution to the US's biggest problems. We've seen the problems in the inner city with disadvantaged populations. I saw a youth gang leader being interviewed in jail, and they asked him, why did you join the gang? He said, $12 an hour. I could not get a job for $12 an hour. Most apprenticeships now start at 15 or something like that. This kid probably would have been a very aggressive apprentice. The rural opioid epidemic, I'm sure you've got that in Texas. What white populations in the rural areas depressed because they lost their jobs. Recovery from COVID is going to take jobs. I keep reading articles about strip malls and people having lost their jobs in services and retails. Turn those strip malls into small factories, specialized factories, clean factories, and hire those people, train them, give them career opportunities in manufacturing. So just huge opportunities for the community and the country. Even pollution. We did a study of aluminum castings, bringing them back, making them here instead of China, and it reduced the environmental impact by 25 to 50% by doing so. So we mainly work to help companies like yours do this better, but big companies to decide to reshore, small companies to get the orders, but we also work with the government. So this is our advocacy program. We've identified actions that the federal government could take, like skilled workforce, always my first choice, that we should have apprentice programs like Germany and Switzerland, a value-added tax, get the dollar down by 20% or so, less regulations, healthcare costs down, all the things that impact manufacturing costs. And you can see about how much price reduction we could have versus imports in this column, totaling 51%. And then in this chart, we show, depending on how much price reduction we get, and again, depending on whether the companies keep using price or we convince them to use total cost, how many million jobs could be brought back. So it just is a very rough summary. If we can get, for every 1% that we can reduce our price versus the offshore price, both expressed in dollars, we bring back something like 100,000 manufacturing jobs. So things that we provide to help you implement this, the TCO estimator I mentioned, the selling and buying smarter, or citing and buying smarter process to help the OEMs, import substitution program to help suppliers convince the OEMs to buy from them, uh, supply chain gaps programs. We partner with the MEPs and EDOs. We'll also help promote your reshoring successes. To let you see one of those, this is the import substitution program, very popular because the supply chain companies really want to sell more. And if you identify a product that you're really good at making, or some widget, something you're really good at making, we can tell you who the biggest importers are of those products, what their address is, what they're bringing in, the tons they're bringing in, roughly what they're paying for it, whom the offshore supplier is. And then we train you to use total cost to convince that company to buy from you instead of buying from offshore. So again, a little summary of this. If you're an OEM and the only success factor that matters to you is price. We win because we have lowest price, not quality, not delivery, not design, not price. Well, then you should probably keep offshoring, because I'm not going to be able to help you get a dramatically lower selling price. But if you depend on faster delivery, quality, having the leading technology, if it would be nice to have a made in USA label, then it is well worth your time to look at the possibilities to source domestically. So we're a nonprofit. We've got all these groups as supporters, and at least a couple of them are Texas-based, Darko, I think. A couple of them are Texas-based, and we're delighted to have the support of all these companies and trade associations that let us work on this and bring you this information. So this is just a little takeaway. This is meant to be the little Dutch boy who's at the dike, and the North Sea's on the other side, which is going to flood Holland. And he sees the hole in the dike and he puts his finger in it to keep it from collapsing. And he hopes that the village elders will find him there and repair the dike. And so conceptually, the little guy is Harry, when Harry used to have hair, and you're the village elder. So I'm hoping you'll take this message out back to your companies, back to your customers, and use it to convince both to reshore more for the good of your companies, your grandchildren, and Texas. So Sanju, please
Yes.
carry on.
Yes, thank you, Harry. So we're going to take question and answers shortly, but before that, I'd like to introduce our next week's session, which is the TCO deep dive. Harry is going to do the majority of the presentation next week, showing you how to use the TCO. And that's, as Carrie mentioned, March 2nd, next Tuesday, same time. The TCO, we're going to look at how do you identify products that are most eligible to reshore. And obviously, you want to start with the products that cause you the most pain. And how to use the TCO estimator. Harry will briefly review the system online and show you how to use it. As he mentioned, it's a free tool. And we will also discuss the power of using TCO. For many years, we've seen companies that have struggled to break walls between departmental silos. You've seen disjointed activities, such as between, say, engineering and production, and that can cause excessive rework. If you're in manufacturing, you recognize what I'm talking about. There have been some solutions to these, like simultaneous engineering, design for manufacturability, and other techniques that have been implemented to break down these so-called walls, or the walls in the silos, or the silo mentality that departments have. And well, now imagine having these silos with an ocean in between. Literally, that's what we're talking about when you do business with a foreign country, when you have your manufacturing done in a foreign country and your design done in the US. So that's what outsourcing and offshoring really does. And in avoiding these silos is a really good strategy for every company, and it's very essential to reshore, for reshoring. If you're thinking of reshoring, you need to think about these silos that you have and break those down, both within your domestic company and also if you're doing business outside. So we're also going to go over how to use the TCO as a sales tool, how you can use it to demonstrate to importers that they can then use to reduce their total cost of ownership by purchasing from you. So if you want to sell to OEMs and other manufacturers or to the US government, this will be a very useful tool for you. And we're going to take question and answers now. I know we just have short of 10 minutes here. Let's try and do the best we can. Carrie, if you would just go ahead and read out the questions, and we'll see Harry and myself and Pam can try and answer those.
Great. So Pam and Sanjay, if you want to bring up your
Yes.
videos, that's great. Well, I hope that our audience enjoyed today's conversation. We will run over time to be able to answer as many of these questions. So please feel to stay on. If not, we'll make sure we send a recap to everyone of today's conversation, including the slide deck. A couple of questions, and these are all kind of leaning in the same direction, but clearly there is, there's definitely the positives and the upside for reshoring or nearshoring localization. But can you talk a little bit about the things that cause some consternation with moving in this direction? For example, does a company need to automate before they're ready to reshore or to be in a position where they can reshore? And I'll leave it to Harry or Dr. Patro to answer.
Harry, go ahead, please.
So is the question, what is it? How does a company know if reshoring is good for it? Is that sort of the question?
Yes, and actually in an entirety, I know we'll talk a little bit about this next week, but specifically, are they technically advanced enough to reshore?
Okay, let's deal with that specifically. Automation is very helpful in that our wage rates are still, let's say, 4 times China's. Maybe 8 times India's, something like that. And so if we operate with the same level of productivity as they do, then our labor content, the labor content of our product is going to be 4 times or 8 times theirs. So if you want to, you either need a product that you can automate to a higher level than they do, that helps, or one that nobody can automate. Like portrait painters, or something like that. So the general solution is that automation is a good thing. It's good for you. It's good for the country, and that it is necessary to be significantly automated if you want to be able to compete with the international competition.
I'd like to add to that, if you don't mind. When we talk automation, obviously we are talking a little bit different skill set that the worker needs. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a recognition that we need higher skills, more geared towards the future. And organizations like ours are already working with the educational institutions, universities, community colleges, and such to modify their curriculum and update it to be prepared for the new workforce. So it's already ongoing, and there's a recognition that there's going to be a lot of reshoring, and therefore the skills that are being taught at these educational institutions are very much in line with the future.
But automation can be robots, artificial intelligence, quite, advanced, but it can also be having a CNC machine tool instead of a manual machine tool, or it can be a CNC machine tool with pallet loading. So there's various steps in automation. If you're at the bottom step, you're clearly not going to compete. And the further up you go, the more competitive you're going to be with other Texans and with Georgia, and with China and India. So automation is inevitably part of your success.
And you hit on the right word, inevitable. So this next question kind of is in line with that. And you mentioned skilled workforce. We've also talked about apprenticeship programs and referencing Germany and their programming. But does the United States have the right workforce, the right skilled mix to handle a mass reshoring?
I've been working on that for 30 or 40 years, and I'd say 20 years ago, the US was at the bottom You know, if Germany was at 10, we were at 2, because we had just horribly neglected the community college training system, the high school, and especially the apprenticeship programs. But in the last couple of years, last 5 years, 7 years, apprentice programs have started to come back fairly aggressively around the country. Community colleges have much better manufacturing training programs. And at the same time, in other countries, let's say other countries are getting soft. So in Germany, it's harder now to get the kids to join an apprenticeship. It's where they used to be easy for them. Now their apprenticeships might not be full. So it used to be maybe Germany was at 10 and we were at 2, and now maybe we're a 4 and they're an 8, or something like that. So and why is it? Because people are tired of student debt. They're tired of like I know of someone who was a vice president of the Milwaukee Area Technical College, big school. And he bragged about the fact that that was the second largest graduate school in Wisconsin. Only Madison was larger, even though there were other graduate schools in Wisconsin, because this technical college had more people who already had a bachelor's degree in a liberal arts field coming back to get a associate degree in a technical field so they could actually get a job and make a living. So I think people are starting to understand that that's an important part of survival, an important part of taking care of yourself, being responsible.
Great. I'm looking at a question here from Joe Kelly from our Q&A tab. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions for our speakers, go ahead and pop those into the Q&A. You can also upvote some of the questions. So if you have the same question, you can just kind of give it a thumbs up and it'll move towards the top. But so, in the 80s, approximately 40 years ago, the economists talked about how the U.S. economy was becoming more service oriented. Obviously, we were leaning in that direction. So what did we do wrong? Were we not foreseeing this possible outcome and that what offshoring would cause to our economy?
Well, I think what actually happened, as I showed you from that one chart, that our consumption of goods has risen rapidly. I think the total mix of good and service consumption has stayed about in proportion. The difference is that most services, think doctor, lawyer, dentist, hairdresser, are not tradable. So if you're going to buy them, you have to buy them from somebody in the US, whereas the products are tradable and they can come from offshore. So the economy responded to the availability of the very low wage rates and enthusiastic workers offshore to source now about half of what we consume in goods from offshore, whereas we still source, 80% or 90% of our services from onshore. So I think it's just the market playing out, helped by companies, the government not doing anything to stop it from happening, and people wanting to buy the product for the cheapest price they can find, no matter where it's made. So it's it's the responsibility of people, of companies, of government, and then taken advantage of opportunistically by the other countries.
Right. And Mark asked this question about the new service. I'm not sure, Mark, if that was the executive order, but Sanju, I know that you had recommended asking this question, so you might know. But will the new service cover all imported goods or those affected only related to federal procurement?
Yes, so we are talking about only those that are going to be purchased by the federal government and state if they require it also, and local government if they require it. But we are specifically talking about the government. So if you're just buying a product to sell to somebody else, that's fine. But you need to be aware, if you're selling it to an OEM who is going to use that as a component in a product they're selling to the federal government, then you should expect to be asked by the OEM to show that you're complying with the requirements. Yes. Carrie, there's a couple of questions I would like to address. It's
Please.
kind of important. I know there are tons of questions. We'll try to answer more, but there's one from Mariana. Is there any funding resources for manufacturers? Any grants that you are aware of? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are many funding grants available for manufacturers, and that's one of the things we do as MEP. So go ahead and send me a direct contact. You can just put it in the chat box, or just let me know your name, your company, and your email address, and we'll get back to you, or your phone number if you're comfortable doing that.
Yeah, Ruben Duran asked this question. What are the requirements to qualify for Made in USA? And what are the differences between manufactured in the US and manufacturers in USA with imported products?
Harry, may I attempt to answer that? I don't know much about it, but I can tell you this, the answer is going to depend in a few days, in few weeks. We should get the provisions all done for the new provisions with the Buy American Act. And so they haven't done that yet. They're still working on it. As I remember, they were like, President Biden has given about 3 months time for them to come up with the specific provisions. So we will know very soon what percentage of your components ought to be manufactured within the US. And of course, it may also differ from industry to industry. For transportation, it may be a different requirement versus, for construction and transportation versus for a manufactured part. So we'll have to wait on that and see. If you want to get in touch with us, we can stay updated with that and let you know.
In general, to use a Made in USA label, in case that was the question, the requirement is that, quote, substantially all, unquote, of the product has to be sourced in the United States. They don't define it. They don't say 98, 99%. They say substantially all. But the way you would interpret that would be if I had a toaster or something, and maybe one screw was imported, yeah, maybe you could get away with that. But if all the screws were, then probably not. If the paint was imported, probably not. So it's real very stringent, and increasingly the government has been tough on companies that skirt around the rule and penalize them substantially, which I think is a good thing, because Made in USA should have a value.
So this is probably a question more, kind of open-ended, maybe more of a comment than a question, but Houston's been known for being a global city, and it wants to increase its global presence. So in this reshoring or nearshoring or localization mix, would you, Harry or Sanju or even Pam, kind of be able to comment on the diversification of your supply chain or your manufacturing mix? I mean, it's not an all or nothing, right? I mean, there's certainly room for sourcing from other places and setting up operations in other places, but there's also very much room for setting up manufacturing here. Is that too philosophical for everyone? I mean, would the U.S. Department of Commerce have kind of a strategy they would recommend for their clients?
Well, one thing I'd like to add before anybody else jumps in is that as part of our organization, we have a Select USA contingent that focuses on foreign direct investment. And so they've really been taking the lead on the reshoring from the perspective of bringing foreign investment into the United States, or at least helping foreign investment that's interested in the United States to find the places that they're looking for. So, from that perspective of diversification, we are working on kind of a push and pull. My shop focuses a bit more on the promotion of U.S. exports, the goods and services that are made here, of that 51% U.S. content. But our Select USA colleagues are on the pull side, bringing those foreign investors in to help folks diversify.
Actually, Select USA is also now working on reshoring as such. So not just the foreign companies doing it here, but the U.S. companies bringing it back. So that's definitely part of their mission for the last year and a half.
Yeah, yep, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. I noticed a question here about can we get it done without the government? And as you saw from the chart that I showed, about 20 or 30% of what's now offshored would be reshored if the companies did the math correctly and invested and trained, did reasonable things. And to put that in perspective, bringing back about 25% of what's now imported would approximately close the trade deficit. It would create 5 million manufacturing jobs. So it's within the power of companies to make a huge difference if they'll do the math, if they'll be long-term oriented instead of short-term oriented, if they'll automate and hire and train a good skilled workforce, they can do it. But it'll be an awful lot easier if the government would step up, cut the dollar, have a value-added tax, subsidize the skilled workforce, do those other things. I'd say not raise the corporate income tax because that reduces the after-tax return on investment of a U.S. factory versus a foreign factory. So there's definitely things that companies can do, and they could get the whole job done if everything worked perfectly, but it'd be a heck of a lot easier if the government would help.
There's a question here I'd like to take really quick. It sounds like it's a continuation. I can't find the origin of the question. It's from Gauri Seth. It says, also, if the labor cost goes up, how can a manufacturer lower their cost and compete with the foreign countries? And I'd like to answer this way. We, as I mentioned, and I wish we had more time to go over more details of what we do, but this is exactly the type of thing MEP centers do. And what we do is we can help you reduce your costs by improving your operations internally. When you reduce your cost, you can now become more competitive. And so bringing down your bottom line numbers. So go ahead and get in touch with us or your local MEPs if you want to. You can get in touch with me and I can connect you with the right people if necessary, but that's the type of thing we do. We can help you lower your cost, even though your labor cost may go up. We're not sure about that, but if it does, we can reduce your other costs of your manufacturing operations and therefore make you more competitive.
I noticed one question from a friend, Mark Tattershaw out there, and thanks for the question and attending, Mark. And you ask, does the services we do, I assume he means I described, apply to all imported goods or only those to be purchased by the government, and definitely apply to all. And Sanju, I think you can add something to that.
Yes, absolutely. So if you want to reshore, irrespective of whether you want to do business with the US government or not, we can still use the tools Harry is proposing. And also we work with all manufacturing businesses. And before COVID, before the incentive to go after reshoring, we were still helping businesses. So it covers all goods. And if you're talking about just if you're talking about the Buy American provisions, if they are related only to federal government procurement, the answer is yes. But outside of that, we are there to help you improve reduce your cost and improve your profitability.
I noticed another question here from Jim about whether these are good jobs that are coming back. And we don't have actual statistics on the wages of the jobs, but we do analyze the tech level of the jobs. And on average, the tech level, high, medium, et cetera, the tech level is biased towards higher tech. And generally speaking, companies making higher tech products pay better than average wages. So I'm quite confident in saying that the jobs that have been brought back by reshoring and by FDI are improving the average wage rate in manufacturing in the United States.
Well, I just want to say that I know there probably are a couple of more questions in the Q&A tab, but we are running out of time and we will get to your questions. Remember, there is a part 2 of this program, which is next Tuesday. And if you are interested in joining us, visit our website, houston.org/events and sign up there. But we'll also just send a note out after today's event with the link to today's presentation. And we really appreciate you being here with us today. I know, again, for many, it's been a very, very difficult week. And again, we hope you're all doing well. We appreciate Harry who, Harry, you're in Florida, aren't you? So, boy, we wish
Suffering down here in Florida.
we were with you last week. And then Dr. Patro, thank you so much. Pam, again, thank you. Pam's local here as well. But great conversation, everyone, and we'll see you next week. So please join us, and we'll make sure that anything in the chat or the Q&A feature is recorded so we can get back to you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
Great
all
job,
very
everyone.
much.
Yep.
Bye-bye.